August 10, 1944, Camp Rustin, Louisiana. The air was thick and hot, smelling of sweat, mud, and fear. Inside a locked barrack, 20 German women sat frozen, prisoners, waiting for the worst. They had been told that Americans were monsters who would hurt them, starve them, humiliate them. Then came a knock on the door. Boots echoed. The door creaked open, but what entered wasn't cruelty. It was kindness. Young American guards carrying baskets, cigarettes, and shiny bars of chocolate. The women screamed at first, and then they cried, because they couldn't believe kindness could taste this sweet. What happened next would change everything they thought they knew about their enemies, and about humanity itself. Stay with me till the end to hear the full story. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe history's real power lies not in hate, but in heart. Spring, 1943. The deserts of North Africa were burning with heat and defeat. German troops, once proud and confident, were surrounded. The famous Africa Corps, the same force that had once pushed the British to the edge of Egypt, was collapsing fast. Planes from the Allied side ruled the sky. Fuel was gone. Food was running out. Among the soldiers were hundreds of young German women, nurses, radio clerks, secretaries, and helpers. Many were only in their early 20s. They had been told they were part of a grand mission, serving the fatherland, helping brave men fight for Europe's future. What they did not know was that they were about to see a very different world, one that their teachers and officers had sworn did not exist. By May 1943, more than 250,000 Axis soldiers surrendered in Tunisia. The women were shocked. Back home, German radio said they would rather die than be taken prisoner. Yet here they stood, hungry, dusty, and alive. A diary found years later carried this line: "We waited for cruelty. We were ready for humiliation. But the American soldiers only asked if we were thirsty." They were gathered at small desert camps before being moved to ships. Their minds were full of fear, stories of torture, starvation, and dishonor. Nazi propaganda had painted the Allies as monsters. A nurse named Lotta wrote, "We were told American soldiers shot prisoners for fun, so we hid our faces when they passed." Instead of beatings, the women saw something they could not understand: order, food, and kindness. The Americans gave them water and white bread, a luxury none had seen in months. Trucks brought tins of beans, crates of oranges, and medical supplies stamped US Army. The contrast was too much to process. How could the enemy, said to be weak and corrupt, have so much? How could they treat prisoners with care? As the women were loaded onto Liberty, ships bound for the United States, they stared at the giant American flag painted on each vessel. The sea air was heavy with salt and diesel. Behind them, Africa burned under the setting sun. Ahead of them waited the land they had been taught to hate. "We did not know if we were going to a factory or a prison," one woman later recalled. "All we knew was that it smelled like soap, not blood." But this was only the beginning, the first step on a journey that would destroy their old beliefs and replace them with a truth they could never forget. The Liberty ship Joseph C. Lincoln left the port of Bizerte on a hot August morning in 1944. The sea was calm, but the women inside the ship were not. Nearly 800 prisoners, nurses, typists, and auxiliaries were packed below deck. The air smelled of fuel, metal, and fear. They expected chains. They found bunk beds. They expected beatings. They found meals, real meals. Each day, cooks served 2,800 calories per person, the standard for US soldiers: meat, potatoes, white bread, butter, and even coffee. For women who had lived on thin soup and dark bread, the first bite of soft white bread was almost a miracle. One of them, Helga, wrote later, "It tasted like clouds. I did not know bread could be sweet." But seasickness hit hard. The Atlantic tossed the ship for days. Many women lay pale and dizzy, holding onto buckets. The smell of diesel mixed with sweat and salt water. The Americans gave them pills and blankets, trying to help, though few words were shared. A young guard named Miller wrote in his notebook, "They stare at us as if waiting for a blow. When we hand them fruit, they flinch." The trip took nearly 2 weeks. Outside, the sea stretched endless and grey. Inside, the women began to whisper. They noticed that their guards were young, boys really. and that they smiled when spoken to. Some even shared chewing gum and magazines. One day, the ship's loudspeaker played a song, "Don't Fence Me In." The women did not know the words, but they liked the rhythm. They had been told Americans were rude and violent, but here was music, light, free, and full of laughter. For the first time, some began to wonder if the war had lied to them, if everything they had believed, about enemies, about superiority, was a story built on sand. The ship's captain told them they were heading to Norfolk, Virginia. The women had never heard the name. To them, America was old, only a rumor, a land of machines, rich food, and chaos. Now it was real, waiting just beyond the grey horizon. One night, as they neared the coast, a few women climbed onto the deck under guard. They saw lights in the distance, hundreds of them, glowing like stars. Cities, roads, ships, all alive in the dark. "We thought it was a dream," one woman remembered. "Back home, we had nothing but blackout and silence. Here, the night was bright." The closer they came to shore, the more the noise grew. Horns, cranes, engines. It was the sound of a country untouched by bombing, a place still alive while Europe burned. The women did not yet know it, but their arrival would be the beginning of the greatest shock of their lives. When the Liberty ship finally reached Norfolk, Virginia, the women crowded near the deck rails. What they saw made them silent. Giant cranes lifted mountains of cargo. Rows of trucks, trains, and ships moved in perfect rhythm. The air smelled of oil, wood, and roasting coffee from a dockside canteen. Everything was loud, bright, and organized. These women had been told that America was poor, full of chaos, ruled by greedy men. But here, they saw a land overflowing with machines and energy. One German nurse whispered, "If this is poverty, then we have never seen wealth." More than 425,000 German prisoners would pass through American ports during the war. The women were part of a smaller group, only a few thousand, but their experience was the same: confusion, fear, and disbelief. American guards lined them up for processing. They were fingerprinted, given numbered tags, and handed clean uniforms marked PW. Doctors examined them carefully, noting malnutrition and infections. To their surprise, the Americans treated them gently, with professionalism, not cruelty. Lotta, one of the secretaries, remembered a tall medic saying softly, "You're safe now." She wrote later, "I did not understand the words, but I understood the tone. It was the first kind voice I had heard in months." Trucks carried them from the port to a train station. They expected wooden cattle cars like the ones used in Europe. Instead, they stepped into Pullman coaches, cushioned seats, curtains, and overhead fans. The floor was clean, the windows opened to the summer breeze. As the train moved south, they passed fields of corn and cotton, small towns with children waving from porches. The prisoners stared in silence. There were no ruins, no hunger, no bombs. One of them wrote, "I saw people laughing in a cafe. I realized the war was far away here, almost unreal." They were headed toward the interior, to camps built in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. The ride took days. At every stop, they saw more signs of abundance. Trucks full of oranges, stacks of newspapers, shelves of canned goods. In the evenings, they were given hot meals, stew, white bread, and slices of pie. To women who had eaten dried turnips for months, it felt impossible. Some prisoners began to cry quietly. "We had been told the Americans were animals," wrote one woman, "but the animals were feeding us." When the train crossed into Louisiana, the air turned thick and sweet. Pine trees lined the tracks. Somewhere outside, a radio played jazz. The rhythm drifted through the open windows. It was strange, almost cruel, to hear music in a world still at war. But to the women, it also felt like a promise. Their train slowed. The sign ahead read Camp Rustin. Barbed wire gleamed in the sun. But inside the fences, the lawns were green and trimmed. They had reached their new world, a prison that didn't look like one. When the trucks rolled through the gates of Camp Rustin, the German women looked around in shock. They had imagined dirty barracks, chains, and shouting guards. Instead, they saw neat wooden huts, tidy gardens, and even flower beds. The camp looked more like a small village than a prison. Each woman was given a bed with a mattress, clean sheets, and soap. There were toilets with running water, electric lights, and hot showers. luxuries none of them had seen since the war began. A guard joked, "You have better plumbing than we do." They did not laugh, but they noticed he was smiling, not sneering. In the first few days, the women were taught camp rules. No escape attempts, no shouting, respect the guards. In return, they would have food, letters, and safety. They soon learned that these were not empty promises. Every morning, a loud bell rang. Breakfast was served in a clean mess hall, oatmeal, eggs, and sometimes bacon. To them, it was a feast. In Germany, food had become scarce. In 1944, an average civilian ration was 1,000 calories per day. Here, they ate more than double. One nurse wrote in her diary, "It was the first time I could eat until I was full. I felt guilty for it." The women were organized into small work groups: laundry, kitchen, sewing, clerical duties. They earned a few cents per day, which they could use at the camp canteen to buy small treats like postcards, soap, or even cigarettes. Some learned English from the guards, practicing words at night under dim lights. The air around Camp Rustin was warm and smelled of pine and wet soil. In the evenings, they could hear frogs croaking and swing music from the guards' radios. Life was slow, but safe. Still, fear took time to fade. Every knock on the door made them freeze. Every shout made them flinch. The memory of Nazi warnings was strong. They said Americans would beat us, but they offered us coffee, one woman later said. Doctors visited weekly, checking wounds and malnutrition. One nurse, once near death from infection, was treated with penicillin, a new medicine they had never seen. "The doctor smiled when I recovered," she wrote. "It made me cry more than pain ever did." For recreation, there were books, drawing paper, even a small orchestra. Some of the prisoners painted or wrote diaries. They began to talk more, laugh more. A few even forgot they were in captivity. But the biggest change was invisible. It was happening inside their minds. The walls they had built with fear and propaganda were starting to crack. As autumn came, life in the camp began to feel almost normal. The guards became faces they knew. The fear softened. Yet one evening, a simple sound, a knock on a barrack door, would remind them of everything they had once believed, and everything they no longer could. It happened one warm evening in August 1944. The sun was setting behind the pine trees, turning the camp golden. Inside one of the barracks, a group of German women sat on their bunks, writing letters or quietly sewing. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. The sound made them freeze. For a few seconds, nobody moved. They remembered every warning from home. When the Americans come, hide. They will hurt you. The women looked at each other, terrified. The door opened slowly. 2 young American guards stepped in. They weren't holding rifles. They were carrying baskets. One smiled shyly and said, "Merry Christmas, early." None of the women understood the words, but they saw the gifts. Apples, chocolate bars, and small paper bags filled with sugar cookies. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the women burst into tears. She reached out, took a piece of chocolate and whispered, "Ich kann das nicht glauben. I can't believe this." That night, the entire camp was filled with laughter and crying. They shared the treats like children, passing each piece around. For many, it was the first real sugar they had tasted in years. The smell of cocoa and apples filled the air. One diary read, "We screamed when they knocked. Then we cried when we tasted chocolate." Everything we had been told about them fell apart in one bite. The guards didn't understand the full meaning of that moment, but for the prisoners, it was powerful. Kindness had broken fear more effectively than any speech. In the following days, more surprises came. A local church sent knitted scarves. Farmers near the camp donated fresh eggs and milk. American families even sent Christmas cards addressed to the German girls in Camp Rustin. One woman later said, "Our enemy became our teacher. They showed us what freedom looked like. It was simple. It was generous." The camp newspaper printed Shout, Ort notes in both English and German. The editors wrote, "All people bleed the same. All hearts can learn again." That winter, the camp looked festive. There was a small tree decorated with paper stars and coloured ribbons. Someone played the harmonica and others sang Silent Night, first in German, then in English. For a few hours, there were no sides in the war, only humans sharing warmth in a cold world. But outside the wire, the war still raged. Cities burned in Europe, and families starved. The women knew that somewhere far away, their brothers were fighting and dying. The thought filled them with guilt. Still, something had changed forever inside them. They had seen that mercy could exist, even between enemies. As one wrote, this was not propaganda. It was real. And that reality changed us more than any battle ever could. The days ahead would bring even more surprises. New technologies, new work, and lessons about the strength of peace. By early 1945, life in the American camps had become strangely calm. The women woke up to birdsong, not bombs. Each day began with the smell of coffee and soap, not smoke and fear. But the biggest shock wasn't comfort. It was discovery. For the first time, they saw how much America could build, make, and heal. Inside the camp hospital, doctors showed them X-ray machines, shiny and humming with electricity. A few women were treated with penicillin, the new miracle drug that saved lives in hours. In Germany, even the wounded soldiers rarely saw medicine like that. One nurse, Greta, wrote, "They used a machine to see my broken ribs. I thought it was science fiction. Then I realized, this is normal for them." The women were also allowed to work on nearby farms and factories under guard. They saw machines that amazed them, tractors, canning machines, and electric sewing tables. In Germany, most of these tools had been destroyed or taken for the war. Here, they ran smoothly, making food and clothes in huge quantities. At one farm, a prisoner asked the farmer, "Why do you work so hard if you already have so much?" The man laughed, "Because that's how we keep it." It was a simple answer, but it stayed in her heart. In the evenings, the guards sometimes played music from a radio. Jazz, swing, and cheerful tunes filled the camp. The rhythm was strange but joyful. Some of the women began to tap their feet or hum quietly. It was music of freedom, something they had never felt in Germany, where such songs had been banned. The women also noticed another thing, fairness. In the camp kitchen, Black American cooks worked side by side with white guards. They joked and shared cigarettes. One prisoner whispered, "But the Nazis said America was broken by race." She watched again and shook her head. Maybe not. Each new day showed them a different kind of power. Not the power to destroy, but to build. It was a quiet power, made of machines, medicine, and kindness. They began to question everything they had been taught. If America could make so much and still treat its prisoners humanely, what did that say about everything they had believed? As the war dragged on in Europe, news slowly reached them. Germany was being bombed. Cities like Hamburg and Dresden were in ruins. Letters stopped coming. The women worried, but they also felt something deeper, shame. "We thought we were the chosen," one diary said, "but we were blind. The world we built was made of fear. The world they built was made of light bulbs, engines, and laughter." The women began to write more, poems, reflections, and letters to their families. Some said, "When we return, we will tell them what we saw. They will not believe us." But what they saw next, and the people they met, would prove that the most powerful weapon in America was not its machines. It was its humanity. By the spring of 1945, the war was almost over. The women in the camps knew it. The guards' radios spoke of Allied victories, and the faces of new prisoners told the same story. Germany was falling. The women felt two things at once: relief and fear. Relief that the war might end soon. Fear of what home would look like when it did. Life in the American camp had become strangely peaceful. Some women helped in hospitals or kitchens. Others sewed clothes or cared for gardens. Every act of kindness from the guards confused them. These were the same enemies they had been taught to hate. Yet now, one American soldier would bring them chocolate on Sundays. Another would fix a broken shoe. One woman, Erica, later said, "When I first saw the guard knock, I screamed. I thought they came to punish us. Then I saw chocolate in his hand. I cried. I couldn't stop." The irony cut deep. The country they were told was cruel turned out to be kind. The people they thought were monsters acted like humans. In one corner of the camp, a young American nurse named Anna helped a German prisoner deliver a baby. It was a cold morning, and the nurse wrapped the baby in a warm blanket. The mother, weak and trembling, whispered in broken English, "Why help me?" Anna smiled softly. "Because that's what we do." Moments like these melted the hatred that had been built for years. The women began to realize that the war had taken more than land or lives. It had stolen their truth. At night, the camp grew quiet. The sound of wind mixed with faint music from the guard post. Some women prayed, others just stared at the stars. One said, "I used to think only Germans looked up at the sky with hope. Now I know. Everyone does." Letters began arriving from home, filled with sadness. Germany was in ruins. Cities were ash. Food was gone. Families were scattered. The women felt torn. Their bodies were in safety, but their hearts were in a broken homeland. The Americans allowed them to read newspapers. For the first time, they saw pictures from Auschwitz and other camps. The truth hit like a storm. They wept, ashamed of what their country had done. Greta, who once called herself a proud Nazi, wrote in her journal, "I believed we were the good ones. I see now we were only blind. The Americans did not destroy us. They showed us what it means to be human." By the time victory was announced, the camp was silent. No cheers, no songs, just quiet tears. Some women asked to stay longer, afraid to go home. They had entered as enemies, but were leaving as students, of kindness, of truth, of humility. But the hardest moment was still to come, saying goodbye to the land and the people who had changed their hearts forever. The war ended in May 1945. Germany had surrendered. The guns were silent, but inside the camps, the women were full of noise. Whispers, crying, laughter, fear. They were going home, but home no longer meant what it used to. The day of departure was strange. The women packed the few things they had. Small gifts from the guards, drawings, bits of chocolate wrappers, letters. Some hugged the nurses and guards goodbye. A few even cried openly. The guards didn't stop them. They understood. One American officer said softly, "You came as prisoners. You leave as people will remember." On the train back to the coast, the women looked out the window and saw America passing by. Clean towns, busy farms, children playing. Everything was alive and full of color. One woman whispered, "So this is what peace looks like." When they reached Germany, the view changed. The land was grey and broken. Houses were burned, bridges fallen, cities empty. Smoke still rose from piles of ruins. The air smelled of dust and loss. Some women found their homes gone, their families missing. Others returned to places where neighbors looked at them with suspicion. The war had not only destroyed buildings, it had broken trust. A few tried to tell others what they had seen in America, the food, the fairness, the kindness, but people didn't believe them. "The enemy treated you well?" they said. Impossible. Yet the women knew it was true. They had lived it. Years later, some of them would write letters and memoirs. They spoke of a strange truth, that their time as prisoners had freed their minds. They learned that real strength was not in shouting or conquering, but in kindness and respect. One former POW wrote, "We lost the war, but we found something bigger, our humanity." Many of them kept one piece of chocolate paper or a photo from their camp days. It reminded them of the day they stopped being enemies and started being human again. As the world rebuilt after the war, those women carried a quiet message, that mercy can break walls stronger than any bomb. They told their children, "Never hate a nation you don't know." The paradox of their story was clear. They had come as proud followers of a cruel regime, but they returned as humble believers in compassion. They had come as conquerors. They left as students. In the end, America's greatest weapon was not its bombs or tanks. It was its kindness, its order, its chocolate.